So we're back here again trying to make this pattern and denim piece. We'll pad that, sew it, and then affix it to our glove. And then once we're done, we'll sew that outside edge. What I did, and again, you can make any shape you'd like. You don't have to settle on this one, although this looks a little bit like the armor that you'll see in the Mandalorian series, or a lot of Mandalorian Mercs. They'll have like a piece of Sentra that is formed to the back of their hand. What I did is I just went ahead and figured out how big this had to be so that it would cover that logo, and then I cut it out. I always save my cardstock boxes. You can see this was a cracker box. This makes great pattern backing, makes it a little stiffer, and it's a lot cheaper than going out and buying cardstock. So I just take the paper and glue it to the cardboard. And then when you get to your pattern, or excuse me, your material, again, this is a gray denim material. Once you get to that and you're going to trace your pattern, it makes it easier if it's cardstock because the paper won't roll up on you. I traced that. Then I gave myself some seam allowances, which are in green. I tried to make those bright enough to show up on camera. Once we cut these out, we'll sew them together and then turn it inside out. I will then stuff it with a little bit of a foam paper packing material, and then we will be ready to sew it to the back of our glove. So probably aren't going to make you watch. I won't make you watch me cut this pattern out. However, once we get to the sewing, I'll definitely show you maybe a little time-lapse video, but you'll see the sewing process on the glove itself. And again, I'm in my dining room, so the acoustics are probably off, and you can also probably hear my cats playing with their toys. That's that little bell sound in the background. But anyway, we'll get started. When we come back, you'll see me sewing these pieces together. So I am all pinned up here. I have the right sides together. And again, I'm going to go ahead and stitch along my pin line there. You have to be very careful when you're cutting these tabs, your seam allowances, when you're cutting these little notches, because if you get too close to the line, it might make it a little difficult for your pieces to stay together. We're going to try to get through this, and again, we're going to leave the top open because remember we have to turn it inside out. And then once we do that, we will be inserting this little foam piece just to give it a little more padding before we attach it to our glove. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this together, and when we get back, you'll see me insert that foam piece, and then I'll put a few decorative stitches on there. So we've stitched that. I was inside the line just a little bit. Remember, I cut my notches a little too close to the actual pattern line. Remove these pins. Again, you'll see I'll trim the edges, and then we will be able to turn this inside out. Apologize if that's a little too close for some of you folks. Just trying to make sure you guys could see my stitch lines on the sewing machine. You'll also notice I sew a couple of stitches away from the edge, then I'll stop and I'll hand crank to the edge. And again, that just gives me a little more control, so I'm not running past the edge of the pattern piece or the pattern line. So here we are. That'll be our outside. And I'll probably wind up pressing this with a hot iron just to get it flat. And then when we come back, I'll be putting an outside stitch around there with that foam piece, and then I'll be running my lines again so that it will look very similar to that finished Boba Fett piece. So when we come back, we'll have this ready to go for our stitching on the outside. So I have the padding in here. I've pressed this flat, and then what I'm going to do is run a very tight stitch. I want to say it's very close to the edge. So I have my needle set all the way to the right, and I'll go all the way around this here, and then that'll secure that foam in place. And then what I'll do is I'll then mark my lines so that I can add my decorative stitching on top. So when we come back after this time lapse, we'll start to attach this pad to the back of our glove. So I've drawn some lines here just for our decorative stitching. Pencil on top of gray denim will actually be nice because it probably won't show up once we're done sewing over the top of it. I'm going to go ahead and put my needle in the center position, not to the right anymore, and start stitching. We are almost done. So what I've done is I've attached the underside here, that's what you can see, to the back of the glove. So I'm going to run a single stitch here, and then we'll flip this over and then stitch all the way around the outside to put it in place, and then we will flip the glove inside out and do our final outside stitch and be done with this. Again, thank you for staying with me, and hopefully we can get through this together and again be satisfied with our result. I'm going to go ahead and make some space so I can get this around. This last stitch line in on the outside of the glove, and it turned inside out. We'll run this thin stitch line up against the edge and be done. So here we have our finished product. You'll notice the patch here covers up that logo that used to be on the back of these gloves. Working with neoprene was a little difficult because it just moves around so much. So when you're stitching, you might want to make sure that you're pinning it down and again just lining things up. I had to run a couple of stitches on the outside just to make sure that it was secure. But as you can see, these will definitely do. They will make perfect gloves for my Mandalorian Mercs costume. And again, these are a different shape, but very, very close to the style on the original Boba Fett. So again, hopefully these work, and hopefully someone is out there is maybe inspired or at least not intimidated anymore for trying to sew or to create some things with laying around leftover items that they haven't used before. So thanks for sticking with me, and next video maybe we'll come back and I'll show you guys how I made my helmet.